Hey guys, so today I want to go over our standard residential sales contract. Sometimes I call it a purchase agreement. Some agents call it a buy-sell agreement, but this is the standard residential sales contract. This is the contract between the buyer and the seller that lays out all of the terms of a purchase agreement. As long as everything in this agreement goes through, we have a closing. Okay, so this document is pretty important. Again, it's what we use to negotiate the price, negotiate when we're going to close, what inspections we're going to do, things like that. Okay, so I'll start here. And if this contract doesn't match the one that you have exactly, that's okay. The gist of these forms is about the same. We update our purchase agreements. We update our sales contracts occasionally. And so if there's a line in here that's a little bit different than what you are looking at on your form, that's okay. You just ask me if you have any questions, okay? So on the right side of the contract, at the top, you'll see you put the address to the property you're going to sell, and you're going to put your contact information here. And on the left side where it says listing office, you put all of the information for the listing agent, okay? If you do not have the listing agent's license number or the brokerage license number, that's okay. The other agent can fill those in. That information is useful to the loan officers and the title company when they are doing the deal. So always fill in your contact information to its fullest, and then fill out the other agent's information as much as you can. But it's not, if you don't have a piece, it's okay. So line 1, this just says who's buying the house and what the date of this offer is. So this offer is made on today's date. Today is February 10th, 2025. My made-up buyer's name is Nancy Buyer, and she's single, okay? So if you had 2 buyers, you would put both their names here. And then you're going to have to specify whether those 2 buyers are married or just 2 business partners sometimes, brothers and sisters. So you might put what their relationship is here. So typically we see single or married, right? But if there's some other relationship, that's where you just note it right there, okay? Father, son, whatever it is, right? And what the buyer's address is. And then we list the seller's name here, okay? Line 2, this is what we are buying, what we are making an offer to buy, okay? 123 Main Street is the address. The address is the city of Jackson with a zip code of 49203, or described as, and some agents will put a tax ID number here, and some agents put an MLS number here. Either way is okay with me. There's people have preferences one way or the other, but whatever you put there is fine. This spot gets a little tricky. Sometimes agents don't know what this next field is for. It's located, and you say either the township if it's in a township, or the city if it's in the city, or village if it's in a village, and what township is it in. And the reason my example here says 123 Main Street, Jackson, Michigan, Township of Summit, is because you could have 123 Main Street, Jackson, Michigan, Township of Leone, City of Jackson, and it would be a different property, right? If it's just because the address says Jackson, it could be in a 2 or 3 different townships in our little county, right? So that's why we have a distinction there, okay? So a township of Summit, county of Jackson in our example. Line 3, let me scroll down a little bit. Line 3 is where we put the purchase price. This is the offer. This is how much we are offering to pay for the property. So you type in the dollar amount, and then you put numerical, same thing. So they should match. Oh, look at that. There's a typo there. $350,000, right? So that number should match this number. The reason we do that is just for typos, like exactly like we had, make sure there's no confusion on what we are offering for the property for sale. Line 4 talks about personal property that's included, and you typically list what is included on the MLS. But if there's any other personal property that the buyer really wants, like the lawnmower in the garage or something along those lines, this is where you would put it to be included, okay? Next up, 9.5 is how are we going to pay for this house? Are we paying cash? You would check that box. Are we getting a new mortgage, which we deal with quite a bit? You check that box. Or are we going to buy the house on a land contract? My example here has new mortgage. That's our most common one that we fill out. And so check that we're getting a mortgage, and we say this contract is contingent upon buyer's ability to obtain a blank type of mortgage. This is where you put the type of mortgage: conventional, FHA, VA, rural development, whatever the type of mortgage that they are getting, you put that there. So you need to know, right? You got to ask your buyer for their pre-approval letter. The pre-approval letter is going to tell you what type of loan, how long, what down payment they're putting, and what interest rate it is. And so you just fill this in based on their purchase, on their pre-approval letter from the bank, right? You say that the buyer will supply a seller a pre-approval letter within 5 calendar days from the acceptance. That could be 1 day, that could be 1 week, you know, depending on if you have the letter. And then when are they going to order the appraisal? That's this next question. So typically you put 10 days in there because we're going to stay on the call. If buyer will make a formal mortgage application and order appraisal through buyer's lender within 10 days of the date of this acceptance. The reason we put 10 days there is you got the home inspection period, which is typically 10 days. And so as soon as that is done, then you'll order the appraisal. Okay. All right, let me scroll down again. Line 6, seller concessions. This is where you would check whether or not the seller is going to pay any of the buyer's closing costs, okay? So in this example, we're going to say yes. We want the seller of the $350,000. We want 3% of that to go to the buyer's closing costs, okay? You need to know how much that money this is. You need to talk to your buyer and talk to your loan officer and know how much they need to ask for. You don't want to ask for 3% if the buyer's planning to pay their own closing costs, because this reduces what the seller gets. So if your offer is for $350, but you're asking for 3% back, that's just like offering 3% less than $350. Okay. So be careful about this. Use this when needed, but also don't forget to ask for closing costs. If the buyer is not planning to pay for their own closing costs and the loan officer is like, yeah, we need every penny that the buyer has for their down payment, you got to ask the seller to pay the closing costs. So this is where you do that, seller concessions, okay? Line 7, this deals with whether or not the seller has to sell their house first. So if the buyer is like, I said that wrong. If the buyer has to sell their house first. So if the buyer says, I will buy this house as long as I sell my old house, I'll take the money from that one, the equity from that house, and use that for my down payment on this house, then you got to check this box. Sale and close of 123 Michigan Ave. It's contingent. So this deal is contingent upon selling the old house. If the buyer is like, I'll buy this house, I don't need to sell my old one, I'll buy this one first, then you can skip that, and check this box, right? But for our example, we need to have a home sale contingency. Line 8, earnest money. This is how much the buyer wants to put down as a deposit. My rule of thumb is about 1%, no less than $1,000. And so we're paying $350,000 for the house. So we're going to put down $3,500. I'm going to have them write a check. It does not have to be a cashier's check. It can be a personal check. And we don't usually like to have cash. So check is the best option. And then where are you going to deposit that check at? And that's where we just pick our local title company. In this example, Mid-State Title. We also have American Title. There's a couple other different title companies in town that we like to use, but Mid-State Title is the example here. And so that's how much deposit, that's the earnest money deposit, okay? So page 2, top of page 2 is line 9, form of conveyance, okay? This is where we ask the seller for a warranty deed. That's typically what we're going to ask for. That box is just pre-checked because that's typically what we're going to ask for. We want a warranty deed with owner's title insurance policy. And then part B, there's a little spot here to fill in how many splits we want to get with the property, and we just usually say all, okay? So in case the property is splittable, we could do that down the road for our client. Okay, 10. This is our deadline to close. We want to close on or before a date, okay? So I typically will pick something that's 4 or 5 or 6 weeks down the road, give us plenty of time to do our inspections and our appraisals and stuff like that. And so I, for this example, just picked March 31st, 2025, okay? Prorations, line 11. This just says that that rent, if there are any, or association fees, if there are any, so homeowner association, HOA fees, if any, will be prorated as of day of closing. And then we have to deal with the water bill, okay? So the seller is responsible for the water bill up until the day of closing, and we want to withhold some money from the seller to make sure that that bill gets paid. So pretty typical that we will say, okay, $200 of the seller proceeds held at closing to make sure that that final bill gets paid so that the buyer is not stuck with it, okay? 12, possession. This is when are we going to get possession of the home? So are we going to get possession at the day of closing, which would be this, it would be this checkbox here. Okay, if we're closing and the keys are getting handed over to the buyer, we can just check that top box and it's no big deal. But if we're giving or negotiating some sort of a possession after closing, then we have to fill out this section number 12. So for our example, I'm saying that at 5:30 p.m. on the 7th day after closing, we'll get possession. So that means, so we're giving the seller 7 days. We're giving them a week. So we're going to close, and they're going to get to stay in the house for 1 week before the buyer gets the keys to the house and gets possession of the house. Okay. And this next section is how much is the seller going to pay for those 7 days. In my example, we're going to put $0. So we're going to let them stay there for 7 days, rent free, as part of our negotiations. And on the 7th day at 5:30 or before, we will get keys to the property. Okay. If you are going to give the seller possession after closing, what I like to add is some sort of a escrow amount to make sure that this clause has some teeth. So when they move out on the 7th day, what we're saying is we're going to hold $5,000 of the seller's proceeds. That's what this sentence here says. Seller escrow $5,000 of seller proceeds to be released upon confirmation that the seller has vacated on time and left the property broom swept in the same condition as at closing. So on the 7th day, they move out, everything's fine, hunky-dory, property's clean, they get their $5,000 back. But if they don't move out till the 8th, they could lose that $5,000. So this gives them a good financial obligation or reason to adhere to the contract, because other than their word, which most people are trustworthy, we want to make sure that they're going to stick to this contract and make sure that they're out on the 7th day. Because, as you can imagine, a buyer buys the house and then they want in on the 8th day. They probably have moving trucks lined up and their buddies are coming to help them move and all this kind of stuff. If they don't get out on time, it's a real problem for our clients. So that's why we put this language down here. Okay. All right, scroll down to line 13. Line 13, there's nothing to fill out here, but it does say that taxes, the property taxes, will be prorated as a calendar year. Okay. you have questions on tax proration, just let me know. That's a whole nother discussion in class, but there's nothing to fill out there. Assessments, line 14. These are kind of like taxes, but it's a special tax, a special assessment, they call it. And this is for like street pavings or sewers that get put in a neighborhood. And what we're saying is, the question here is the seller going to pay off that assessment, or is the buyer going to take over those payments? Okay. My default is that we want the seller to pay them off in full, but it is negotiable. A buyer could absorb that bill at closing and start making the payments on that bill moving down the road. Line 15 deals with disclosures. So we have a couple of different disclosures. We have lead-based paint disclosures, and we have sellers, just Michigan disclosures, sellers disclosures, and we find the dates that were filled out by the seller, and we put those dates here. Okay. So I'm assuming that they filled out all this paperwork on January 1st. And so we're going to put those two dates in there and say that the buyer has received them. Okay. Let me scroll down a little bit further. The last section on page 2 is whether or not you want a home warranty. Okay. And you can waive a home warranty, or you can have the buyer pay for one, or you can ask the seller to pay for one. So you check that first box, and then you pick the brand, the warranty brand you want, and whether it's going to be paid for by the buyer or the seller, you put their name right there. Pretty simple. All right, moving on to page 3. Okay. Page 3, line at the top is 17. This is the inspections page. Page 3 deals with mostly all the inspections. With residential real estate, with real estate of any kind here in Michigan, it is an as-is state. So the real estate is sold in as-is condition. So we have to do all of these inspections prior to closing, because once we close, we can't return the property. It's sold as is. Okay. So in order to do all the inspections, we have to put them in writing. So the very first checkbox at the top, nothing to really fill out, but you just check it, and then it gives your buyers 10 days to do a home inspection. If you check the bottom box there, this one, that's waiving a home inspection. We don't ever recommend to waive a home inspection, but they could. Okay. And then down here, 18 is inspections for if the property has well and septic. Okay. So this particular example, we might be connected to city water, city sewer, right? So we check those boxes. But if it has a well and it has a septic system, we probably want to inspect those, right? So we would say the buyer is going to inspect all those things: the water, the well, and the septic system. Okay, see those words are bolded. And then in some cases, a buyer will want to waive a well and septic inspection, but we don't recommend that, right? So this gives them 10 days to do this inspection. You have 10 days to do your home inspection, 10 days to do your well and septic inspections, and then 19, this is pest inspections. This gives, if you check this box, that gives the buyer 10 days to do a pest inspection, looking for termites, powder post beetles, carpenter ants, carpenter bees, okay? Or they can waive it. Again, we don't recommend waiving inspections, but they could. They have that option. All right, line 20, survey or mortgage report. This is another inspection where if we aren't sure of the property lines, then you might want to do either a mortgage report, an improvement report, or worst case, a stake survey. Stake surveys are, take a long time and are expensive. If the seller already has one, you could check the box there that the seller shall furnish at their expense a stake survey. But if the property lines are fairly well defined by the neighborhood and there's really no property line disputes to be had, then a buyer could waive a stake survey. Okay, this is one of the times where we do see that quite a bit. And then line 21 says that this is nothing to fill out here. but this just tells the buyer that real estate is sold as is. And so we have to do all those inspections because once we close, right? Sold as is. It also says in the very bottom of line 21 that we should do a final walkthrough. So it gives us time to, it tells the buyer that they should do their final walkthrough right before closing. The last line on page 3 talks about legal counsel. So 22, there's nothing to fill out, but it does tell the buyer and the seller that this is a legal contract and we are not attorneys. And so they have been advised to seek legal counsel. Okay. If they want to. All right, scroll down again. Now we're on to page 4. This is the last page of the standard purchase agreement. Okay. 23 talks about arbitration. So if there was any dispute arising out of this transaction, whether it be for the earnest money or the condition of the property or anything, if both parties agree to arbitrate down the road, then the buyer initials here and the seller initials here, and whatever that issue is, they can call an arbitrator and go deal with it. And it's nice to stay out of court sometimes, and we don't get sued as much if both parties are agreeing to arbitrate. And so lately, that's been my recommendation, is to get people to agree to arbitration. Keeps us out of court. Line 24, other provisions. This is where if there's anything else not dealt with in this purchase agreement, anything out of the ordinary, I think this purchase agreement, sales contract does a pretty good job of addressing all of the issues. But if there's something else that the buyer wants to ask for, any other provisions is a good spot to put it. So let's say you are negotiating they call an escalation clause, or you say buyer will perform all home inspections within 5 days. Some sort of a thing that modifies what the standard language is. Okay. So 24, that's where it's just a free spot to type anything else you want to put into the purchase agreement. 25 says that that everything we're agreeing to is in writing. Okay. That there's no oral agreements. Everything is going to be in writing. Okay. 26 talks about electronic communication. Instead of having to physically deliver, everybody agrees that we can email these contracts back and forth. Just some legal language that the attorneys threw in there for us. So let me scroll down to 27. Okay, this is line 27. This is where the buyer is going to sign. Okay, we're going to type the buyer's name. And this is where we request the seller to respond by. So the buyer gives the seller until 6 p.m. February 12th, 2025 for written acceptance of this contract. Okay. This is a request that the seller accept our offer by 6 p.m. on the 12th. The seller is not obligated to accept our offer. They could counter our offer. They could reject our offer. They could do nothing with it. They can ignore it. We can't force the seller to do anything. So I tell buyers, this is a request. Now, if the seller accepts this offer before this deadline, we have a deal. If the seller accepts after this deadline, maybe the buyer found some other house, bought a different house, right? So if it's after this deadline, it goes back to the buyer to approve it and move forward, or to say, no, sorry, I changed my mind. So before this deadline, if the seller accepts it, we've got a deal. After this deadline, the buyer just has to agree to it again. Okay. So you just put your name there, buyer's name there, and your buyer will sign on line 27. And then it's, we got a couple other forms to fill out, but we're going to leave 28 blank and 29 blank. That's when you send it to the seller. And if the seller wants to accept it, they will fill out section 28. And when it comes back to us accepted or countered or what have you, Then we fill out section 29 again. We fill out section 29 at the end to show that we accepted the seller's changes or what have you. Okay. So we stop filling out the form at section 27. Okay. Then we scroll down. We have a notice to buyer. This is a CYA form, just a hold harmless form. This just tells the buyer that they need to do all their due diligence, all their inspections, and that buying real estate is risky, and that we are not liable for any errors and stuff like that if they buy this house. And then we keep scrolling down to our buyer agency contract. This is pretty self-explanatory too. You fill out the buyer's information, you fill out your information, and you fill out how much the buyer is going to be charged to buy a house, right? So we don't work for free, obviously. So a buyer hires us to help them find a house and show them houses and navigate the paperwork and fill out the this paperwork and guide them right through the transaction. And we charge for that, right? So our fee that they agree to is listed on line 3, and we do like a 3.5% commission, right? And we put some sort of a no less than 2,500 or whatever dollar amount you want to put in there. My go-to is no less than 2,500. And so you fill in 33.5%, no less than 2,500. And plus we charge a $395 admin fee to Production Realty. And then this part here that's in bold lines in section 3 says that the buyer will receive a credit against any amount owed for commissions paid to the broker by the seller or the listing sellers or the seller's listing broker. So if we get paid by the listing agent, that's a credit towards this 3.5%. So if we get 3.5% from the seller, then it covers 100% of the compensation that we're charging the buyer. If the seller only pays us 3%, then we deduct that from the 3.5. Your buyer's only responsible for 0.5% of commission if they're getting 3 from the seller. Hopefully that makes sense. So you will sign here at the bottom and the client will sign that. We also fill out the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships. This is a state of Michigan form, explains the few different ways that we can work and represent clients. So we can be a seller's agent, we can be a buyer's agent, or we can be a dual agent, okay? In this particular example, we are representing the buyer. So we're gonna check the buyer's agent box. This one's checked always by default, okay? Everybody in our office works on the same relationship. So everybody in the office is a buyer's agent. So you're gonna sign here where it says licensee, and then we're gonna check this box, have the buyer sign here and date, okay? And then the last form, this is kind of a newer one. This is our commission agreement form between us and the other brokerage, okay? They may tell us that they're gonna pay us a commission, but we need to put it in writing. And if they didn't send you one of these forms already, then I want you to send them one back. I want you to pre-fill this out, put in the dollar amount, the percentage that they said that they would pay us. And if they said 3.5%, then put 3.5% on here. And then everybody signs this. And as long as we close, they will pay us a commission. Okay, this is a standard Michigan Realtors form. Everybody in the state is using this now. It shouldn't be very complicated. Just put in the property that they're paying us on, the broker's name, and us, and how much they're going to pay us. And then they sign it and we sign it. It just says that we're accepting their commission. Okay, so that is the packet. That's the basic purchase agreement or sales contract packet. And if you have any questions on any of these forms, or you are confused by something, or if you want to add something, we can use addendums to do so. And just please let me know. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you later. Thank you, guys.